A team that's starting to find a little bit of joy here lately, regardless of George Russell's retirement due to a brake issue after going into the barrier early on in the race in Canada, is Mercedes. Lawrence and we had talked about this last week on Unlapped. If you were a Mercedes fan, would you go into Canada more giddy, or would you go in a little cautious, a little apprehensive that, these upgrades weren't going to show consistency and progress? And I think it's fair to say, Lawrence, you had mentioned that Montreal wasn't necessarily the track to lend itself to the Mercedes car at the moment. But for Lewis Hamilton to end up on the podium, and likely George Russell would have been in the mix, certainly up there near the front, had his day gone a little bit differently. These upgrades are working. They've got another upgrade package coming at Silverstone in a couple weekends, July 9th. Toto says if any of the races they're going to win on the calendar, it's going to be that one. Do you agree, or is he just trying to keep everybody watching these races moving forward because it's Max Verstappen's to win?
I think it is Max Verstappen's to win, but if you're going to ask if there's any race you could win or you're most likely to win, what's it going to be? Silverstone's going to be right at the top of their list because one, they do have this upgrade package coming. They've talked about how this new direction, which they started off in Monaco with a big upgrade package, and it's been on the car in Spain and Canada, obviously, and they've kind of refined it slightly, found a bit more performance. Well, that's also opened up some new development opportunities in the wind tunnel, and that's what's going to come onto the car in Silverstone. So they've made a step, and they believe there's another step to find soon as Silverstone. So that's all very positive. Now, I don't think anyone at Mercedes is expecting it to get them close to Red Bull, especially around a circuit like Silverstone, which will suit the Mercedes, but will also suit the Red Bull. But, I think there is this question is, can Red Bull win every race? And the obvious answer every time is probably not, because at some point something's going to go wrong, be it reliability, unfortunately timed safety car, weather on the wrong lap, that kind of thing. And all of those things can happen at Silverstone. So I think what Toto is probably saying is that they're most likely to be in a position to capitalize on anything that happens to Red Bull at a track like Silverstone. And I think it's a track where, for example, they should hope to be ahead of Aston Martin, who also made a significant step in Canada. But I think it wasn't quite as obvious because Fernando was dealing with some brake issues towards the end of the race. And but even so, he still fell behind Lewis and got back ahead of him, which kind of shows you that while Mercedes have made steps, Aston Martin aren't hanging around either. So I think they're looking Silverstone because they know it's a track a bit like Spain, some similar characteristics. In Spain, they were the obvious best of the rest. They were still a long way off Max, but they got two cars on the podium. And so they're looking at Silverstone, and I think they're thinking, why not something similar there? It's also kind of relatively a home race for them and a number of teams, actually, including Aston Martin, who are just across the road, but it's a home race as well for Mercedes. So there's always a venue where they look to do pretty well, and they actually have done pretty well in the past. So I think there's an opportunity there, but I don't think he's saying, look, we're going to go to Silverstone and win. Just beat Red Bull straight up. He's saying we're going to go there and we'll have a chance to take advantage.
It's said that Red Bull is already focusing on next year's car. Lawrence, how much time do you think that Mercedes should focus on 2023 versus the 2024 car? And can you just describe how teams kind of split their focus on the season that we're in and then obviously the future?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if there isn't a single team that hasn't devoted some focus at least towards next year. The good news is we've got relatively stable regulations, even more stable than they were from last year to this year, because there was a change in the floor height and stuff like that. So you can, if you develop something and it works for this year's car, well, it will actually work for next year's car as well. So while Red Bull may be looking at stuff for 2024, they aren't really planning a concept change. They have this very good, rich vein of development that they're tapping into at the moment. So they'll just be going deeper and deeper into that. And some of that will help this year's car. Some of it may require some more fundamental changes, and they'll be looking at how they can do that in 24. Meanwhile, Mercedes have made some big changes already to this car, but there's some certain stuff that they just cannot change because it would require a new chassis, and they can't build and develop a new chassis under the cost cap because they will blow it all within the space of couple of months. So, but they can develop one for next year because they're going to need new chassis anyway next year. So, that's what they're working on is kind of trying to understand the big changes they can make. But that's the thing, because the regulations are stable, any benefits you find now, and now that Mercedes have gone off on this different development path by changing the front suspension, any advantages they can find there will feed into next year as well. So I think compared to other seasons where we've talked about the importance of focusing on the following year as opposed to this year, it's probably a little bit more successful this year just because the regulations are going to be stable going through. But anyone looking to really mix up the concepts of the car, one, they will have to make those decisions very soon, because when we're talking about big things like rear suspension mounting points and cockpit positions and stuff like that, that all has to be agreed on relatively early on. And then, the stuff which they're working on up towards the launch of the car, is all very small little aero flicks and, fancy bits. But the fundamental decisions really have to be put in place now. So Mercedes will be doing that. Red Bull will be doing that as well. But they will all be doing it with knowledge and lessons and, understanding from the current car that they can then put into next year's.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.